This is a great conversation. We have three masters of the process with us to share their life experiences. And, you know, I think that we have Marcus Shelby and Francis and Paul, and that each of them has a whole palette of different kinds of work, from performing to touring to music producer to presenter to commercial work to being commissioned both as a musician and through collaborative projects with other artists and community organizations. So they'll be speaking about that. And let me give you just a brief introduction to each of them, and then they'll further talk about their work in the conversation. So we have Paul Dresher, who is performer, composer, founder, and artistic director of the Paul Dresher Ensemble. And they are known for being one of a handful of composer-led groups that tours extensively throughout the country with really the highest percentage of commissioned original work. So that's their repertoire. And they bring contemporary chamber music and new musical theater to audiences around the country, as well as being an innovative instrument maker of both mechanical and electronic instruments. On the far left, we have Marcus Shelby, bassist for over 23 years. He is a musician, composer, music producer, educator, and is known for his collaborations with a lot of different kinds of artists, for developing work with spoken word artists, with other musicians, with ballet and other kinds of dance, as well as theater. And a number of these works have documented history, such as his piece on Harriet Tubman, on Port Chicago, and he developed educational clinics and residencies that are companions to his commissioned works. And then we have Francis Wong. Francis Wong, a saxophonist who for, over 2 decades has been really central to developing knowledge and creative expression and branding for Asian American jazz, and who defines one of his key goals in work as to build community. And in that capacity is presenter, artistic director, nonprofit arts organization manager, educator, mentor, consultant, music producer, and he'll of course go through much of that on his own. So let's just kick this off. The title of this panel is Hybrid Business Models, and I would extend that to artistic models as well. And Francis, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start with you. So could you describe what you would say is your artistic business model, and try and give a sense of the arc of your path from your more beginning years as a musician, and how you added different layers of work, and if you can give a sense of time, how long it took to develop each phase, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Sylvia, and thank you everyone for being here. And are we a little cooler? I don't want to be that hot. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and it's really exciting to be in a group of musicians who are trying to make their own way, because this is one of the main ways that we do it, right? Okay, and there's a lot of, on a personal, it's really exciting because I have Todd Tate and Kat Para, San Jose State in the 1986. Oh yeah, hey. So, actually, that was pretty exciting, but there was a lot of things that we learned at, well, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I learned at San Jose State. There was 2 things that I think that were really important. One is the late Dwight Cannon. He told us, do it any way you can. and he was, and I'll get back to that, because that's a phrasing of something. The other thing that I learned at San Jose State, among other things, was that the importance of the composer-performer. And I was so excited to be on this panel with Paul, because he doesn't look that old. But 25 years ago, I was sitting in musicianship class, and Brent Heisinger and Alan Strange were teaching the class, and they said, the model for the success of new music is folks like Paul Drescher, because they didn't wait for the orchestras to commission them. They didn't wait for the string quartets. They went out, formed their own ensembles, booked the gigs in the clubs, and went and did it. You know, so Paul Drescher. And for myself, as I was, actually, I had already been active as a musician before I went to school. I wanted to network and I wanted to pick up some skills and things like that. And so the idea to be a composer, to tell my own story, basically, as a Chinese American, that was my mission at that time, and it still continues to be that my mission. And so I really drew inspiration from that idea that I wasn't going to wait for those opportunities. I was actually going to create them. And I think that was a very, very important lesson. And as Paul mentioned before, we were talking before, it didn't start in the 60s. It goes way back, and it goes into our music as jazz and the different heroes who you know, kind of made that music happen. So that was my long introduction, sorry. But somebody, Kevin, who's I saw in the other room, he was asking, well, what's the hybrid musician mean? And I basically say, I took it from Malcolm X. So it's Malcolm X. Sometimes somebody told me this story about some young person said, they were talking about Malcolm the 10th. I said, yeah, not the Pope, the political leader. That's right. So Malcolm, according to Malcolm the 10th, he had this and for those of you who don't know about Malcolm X, he was a really dear friend of our music community. You know, very close to Billie Holiday. He was very close to Dexter Gordon. He used to do the towel thing in the bathroom at the Audubon Ballroom, where all the bands came in. You know, so he knew what musicians did. So anyway, he had this expression, by any means necessary, right? And that to me, that brought it back home. That's a different, I like to have, you know, because maybe I'm Chinese, I like these ways to do it. You know, it's like, do I can? It says, do it any way you can, Malcolm the 10th, by any means necessary, okay? So anyway, so I have a background, actually, obviously I have a background in the social justice movements of the 60s and 70s. And a part of what I see my practice today as an artist is continuing the spirit and mission of those very heady times. And I guess important things that happened during that period of time, at least for the arts, was this idea of self-determination. You know, determining one's own destiny, and also picking up the skills, you know, putting together the strategy to make that happen. So whether it was the example of what they used to call black capitalism back in the day, or different, or the, you know, Nkrumah and, or the guys from Kenya, you know, no, what's that guy's name? Tanzania. Well, anyway, Ujamaa, all those principles, Umoja, all these different principles. Yeah, all these principles were about self-reliance, self-determination. And as a Chinese American, trying to, you know, trying to understand how to be in the society and make a living as a musician and do something with my music, these were important things that kind of made me think, oh, how do I connect it to my own experience? And so institution building became a whole part of what I was trying to do, you know, at strategy. At the same time, I was trying to develop as an artist, and I was meeting individual artists or reading about or studying their models. And so I met this guy named John Jang, who's a very important pianist and composer, who was influenced by the AACM in Chicago. That's the at Alliance, Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. And we actually, a lot of us Asian Americans were looked at them, and they had this thing like they had membership, and you were required to have a concert every year of your own music. You know, you had everybody in the collective had to help each other's concert. You know, so there was different principles that really resonated with me, and looked to be a way for myself to try to pursue a career in music without being the kind of traditional Yankee capitalist approach, right? That was collective, it was shared, and could be successful. And so that kind of is kind of like the underlying philosophy of some of my work as an artist, and has meant collaboration with a lot of different musicians. It has meant taking care of the business. So that's meant, hey, you know, where's the money? How are we going to get it? How are we going to serve the needs of the funders who wish to, you know, how do we share objectives and goals, you know? So these are all different things that were part of how I kind of got started and kind of underlying my overall practice over the past, I guess, Asian improv arts. We've been doing it for 23 years. I got my start a lot earlier than that, but I think that's been kind of, I think probably that's the main message I give at this point.
Sorry, because I didn't mention Asian Improv Arts as part of your introduction, which is so key as a vehicle for your work. And could you just share a little bit about the different kinds of work which Asian Improv Arts does, because that's very much reflective of the multiple streams.
Sure. So Asian Improv Arts is a 501c3. We also have a S corporation called Asian Improv Records. And then we have we kind of have this like concept of an Asian improv group. We have websites, we have affiliated artists, and things like that. I mean, those are big words, but there's a couple of dozen artists who are kind of involved in an affiliated way. And as a 501c3, our primary outcome over the past 23 years has been support for artists at varying stages of their career, from emerging artists to master artists. So we've done projects with folks like Max Roach. We did a collaboration between him and John Jiang and Jie Bing Chen, the master erhu player, Chinese fiddle. But we also do things kind of with emerging artists, you know, try to get in some showcase or whatever it is, you know. And we do a lot of projects in the community. Last week we produced the Chinatown Music Festival, attended by 5,000 people. So we do different things like that in the community and try to link, make a sense of continuum between the kid in the elementary school in Chinatown to the master artist who is traveling internationally. Maybe not very much internationally, but still doing it. So that's kind of what Asian Improv does.
Paul, you want to take a stab at the next one?
Thanks, Francis. Pleasure to be here today, and an honor to be asked to participate in this. I guess I'm probably the oldest one up here. I'm not sure, but I am a child of the 60s too, and counterculture in a lot of different ways. And I think that did form a lot of my sort of sense of, I'm good. I think through that period, one had a sense that you could question all the rules that were around you, and you could try to do things in different ways, and don't assume that what you were told was going to be true. And I think I sort of approached my artistic life in a related sort of way, in other parts of my life too. And when I felt like this, for me, the 70s was a period of really intense training and studying a lot of different traditions. I made my living playing rock and roll. I had been in rock and roll bands from the late 60s on, and I'd been the guitar player, and I was the one who went out and got the gigs. I was the one who printed up the flyer. And I had that kind of, whatever that leadership or entrepreneurial sort of bent was sort of often felt to me in the groups I was in. And then in the 70s, I spent a lot of time studying different kinds of world music cultures. performances of other traditions besides the Western pop music and classical music, which was also in my childhood background. And I studied West African drumming for many years with C.K. Ladzekbo and Kobo Ladzekbo in L.A. and Balinese and Javanese music, and then North Indian classical music was many years of devotion to that tradition. So I kind of broadened the horizons of my musical world, and then spent a year traveling, mostly in Asia, but also in Africa. And when I came back here, I sort of started to be a composer, and as Francis had said, I'd always been a performer. That's sort of my feet on the ground was always through playing an instrument, and my composition grew out of that experience. Although I have often composed for ensembles that I couldn't possibly perform, whether it's an orchestra or string quartet or anything like that. I'm a guitar player. So from the beginning, though, I used the model, a little bit of a rock and roll band, as kind of the model for the career that I've sort of developed in a very hybrid, and I guess hybrid is an appropriate term, because what I do doesn't fit easily into any particular category, whether it's contemporary classical music or popular music or world music. It's kind of, it has multiple feet or tentacles, I don't know what would be the right one, metaphor, and it kind of sits on a lot of boundaries. And the one thing that I found to do that, to live that kind of life between the cracks, in the boundaries between traditional pathways, is you have to develop your own community. You have to make connections to people. You have to find people who share that spirit, share that motivation and devotion, and then you have to support each other. You have to, you can have your own obsessed vision, but to realize that vision, you need people to both critique you, to inform you, and to help you realize that vision. And you have to do that for them, and you learn something just as important from the people that you support as from the support that you get from other people. So from early on, I sought to be as flexible and versatile as I could be. So I might be a musician in somebody's project. I might be the composer and the leader of another project. I might write the music for a choreographer. I might do incidental music for a theatrical production. But in that process, you learn all about all these different disciplines. And I think most successful musicians you talk to are versatile, are people who've found ways to use their musical skills, to use their sensibilities in a lot of different contexts. Even in the classical music world, if you think of Stravinsky, he started out being a ballet composer, and he was servicing somebody else's big idea, but he also was able, because he was an astonishing artist, was able to completely create something totally identifiable as his own, and obviously change the world of music through the collaborative process. And there's artists like that at all times. And so I would just tell people that, I mean, if it suits your personality, to work with other people, and not just work with musicians, but work with other disciplines. Transform your sense of self by putting your artistry into counterpoint with another artist's perspective. And as I promise you, if you've ever worked with dancers and choreographers, they know your music better than you do. They will tell you exactly what's going on at a certain time. And they will hear it in a different way, and you'll get a different sense of meaning through that collaborative process. In terms of a business model, so I found that because my ideas were ambitious, they involved objects, people, instruments, inventions, things like that. I had to support that. I needed space, I needed tools, I needed people to work with. And so I was sort of forced into kind of becoming an institution or an organization. And I also have a 501c3 organization, and we have our own rehearsal studio. And because I invent musical instruments, and we do a lot of work with scenic elements in our music theater productions, we have a small scene shop, so we have tools and materials and stuff like that. And so, and we've developed a good inventory of sound equipment, because a lot of what I work is with electronic music and amplified music. So we have good sound equipment, and we share this with people. So the group of people who are, who we touch, they can use our rehearsal studio. If they need to use the shop, as long as they're not going to cut their fingers off, they can have access to the shop that we either rent very inexpensively or loan sound equipment out to projects, to people that are in our orbit. And that idea of building the community and then sharing the resources and skills that you have has been, I think, a real essential part of our of my organization's ability to keep going through a lot of different, challenging times economically and changes in sort of the fashions of philanthropy and stuff like that. And I guess the inevitable question is, well, where does the money come from? And it comes from a multiplicity of sources. I'll be honest, the majority does come from philanthropy, comes from private foundations and some public money, comes from individual donations. But we get commissions, so we have a project that the Stanford University or the University of Iowa will say, we'll give you, maybe we'll get 3 or 4 different institutions that will want to present the work to help pay for the creation of the work. So we get that, and then we do have our own sort of small record label that releases recordings, not just usually of a circle of people that we touch in some way, not just my work at all. In fact, I think I've only got 1 release on the label. But we commission other composers, so the composers write for our music ensemble, and then sometimes those end up on releases. So it's a variety of different things, and yes, we get even occasionally some royalties when some film person or dance company wants to use one of my scores or one of the things that we've released. So it's keeping a lot of balls in the air all the time, constantly juggling and putting your attention and looking for the places where you think there's an opportunity for the particular thing that you have that may be unique or may be possible for someone else to connect to work together to share your resources.
Thank you.
Thank you. How's everybody doing? All right. This is really great for a number of reasons. I made the mistake when I was coming up earlier after I was in music school in the early 90s to never going to things like this, conferences like this, get-togethers like this, and it ended up sort of making me try to recreate the wheel in some cases, because I never got the advice from people who had done things that I wanted to do, similar things. So I just wanted to start off at the bat and say this is a really awesome thing that's happening, because I see people in the audience that are really, established artists already and performing, but they're here, and I've been meeting people who maybe not have that career trajectory yet. So there's a nice mix here, and this is a really wonderful thing. A lot of my career, I've been playing for about 20 years now as a professional artist. Started in Los Angeles, and I come from the school that Francis Wong created, because a lot of the people he has worked with were some of my teachers, like James Newton. So a lot of the philosophy that he shared, I would just echo. A lot of it has to do with social justice. A lot of it has to do with remembering history. My personal background is I came out of the Black Baptist Church. My grandfather was a minister, so every Sunday I heard spiritual music. I heard a form of communication. I heard a sort of reverence to life and human dignity. So these were things that really had, I wouldn't say directly have anything to do with music, but had everything to do with purpose. So these principles were installed in me at an early age. So when music came around, I was like 13 years old. My mom said I either had to be an usher or join the choir. And I'm like, man, I had joined the choir. So I had started messing around with the bass, and just to kind of push things forward, this is the first place I heard the blues playing for the male chorus. So this was the musical foundation that became part of my sort of spirit. So as I got older, music that had the blues inflection or the sensibility of the blues became immediately attractive. As I became older and got into school, I actually didn't go to music school initially. I went to engineering school, electrical engineering. And I discovered I hated that stuff. I kind of went back to music and went to Cal Arts. And the thing that came back to me was, all right, how am I going to make a living doing this, right? I told my parents, I don't really see my future in electrical engineering. I don't see how I could really take this education and really build a vision on it or I don't have a vision about it. And so, but in music, I did have a vision. I had become more involved in music. I always did music even as a secondary hobby. But I remember going to a concert, seeing Wynton Marsalis perform. And I saw a lot of things in that concert outside of the music. And it took me back to purpose. It took me back to history. It took me back to giving me some things that I felt like a vision I could build in music. And so from that point on, 1990, really, to now, nothing has really changed. It's really been about executing that vision and always remembering the purpose of why I do this music. And then obviously there's an education of that from that day. Now I'm very fortunate. I've always had good mentors around me, like Billy Higgins, who was my mentor in Los Angeles, and his whole purpose in music was to really take the money that he made on the road, touring on records, to keep this center open in Los Angeles called the World Stage. And that was the center that I came out of. So everything I learned came from this person, Billy Higgins, about how to take what you do in life and take that purpose and how to give back to your community. So that's really, and James Newton was part of that because he was my teacher at CalArts. James had worked quite a bit with Francis and John Jang in the past. So that sort of teaching became part of me. So then I started thinking about, well, again, how do you make money at doing this, right? So I started thinking about all the things that were interesting to me in life. One was working with kids. How do I use music to really continue that relationship? I have 2 kids of my own, 7-year-old, 6-month-year-old. And so it was a very important thing to really find a way to use music, something that I enjoy doing, and finding ways to have that part of my life force. What else do I like to do in music? I also like to perform. So there's the obvious learning how to play, developing your musical language, developing your repertoire if you're a composer, creating music if you're someone who likes to play, being diverse enough in your repertoire to be able to play with other people and to be able to lead your own groups. I also was very interested in history. So all of these, whatever your interest is, I found all of these different ways to pursue that and build partnerships and collaborations, as both these gentlemen brought up, to fulfill that. So one of the things, I was in Los Angeles from 1990 to 1996. It's a totally sort of different economic model for an artist there than it is here. When I was in Los Angeles, I think primarily there's a lot of record labels there. A lot of artists are either chasing a record deal or trying to be a part of the film industry. But I didn't really learn about or know about the grant world or foundation world until I moved here to San Francisco. So if I was to fast forward from 1996, I moved here in 1996. One of the first people, or first places I met was the Intersection for the Arts. And it was through them that I began this education on how to apply for funding for all the various things that interest me. That was really a critical step, because in the Intersection, I met people who were able to help me articulate my vision. I met people who were knowledgeable about the various funding that existed that I could apply for. One of the first things I applied for there was a Meet the Composer grant. And I was able to get that grant, and it's right around I believe we got it, we were in the same class, if you will. It's a 3-year grant. And so that kind of began the process of thinking about other funding, because I had never done this before. So I guess one of the first things I would advise is to really, as an artist or creator or producer, whatever, and this is a no-brainer obviously, is to educate yourself about what exists for all the various interests that one may have, and their various levels of support. And sometimes you have to do a matching grant, and sometimes you might be able to get a direct-to-artist grant. But the first thing I had to really do, and I would suggest to anyone, is that vision of what you want to do, whether it's midterm or long term or short term, because then that will really give you the guidance of the type of funding that you might want for the type of work that you want to do. And then building the partnerships, as both of them had said, is I have to really echo that, because no one can be ambitious, and we all want to be ambitious in our work, at least enough to really articulate the expressions that we have, and so no one can really do that by themselves. I think effectively it's hard, but we should be able to have the type of control by having it be consistent with our vision. So, and along the lines, sometimes there are disappointments. You may not get a grant that you applied for, you know, but, and that happens a lot. It happens a lot. You start going, man, maybe I should go back to engineering, you know. But you can either think of it as a negative, or you can think of it as a, what can you learn from losing or being rejected from a grant? Because you don't get a grant, or I'm speaking specifically for applying for grants, doesn't mean that your work, doesn't necessarily mean that your work isn't good or isn't ready. There's a lot of factors. Sometimes it's timing. It could be anything that has it could be anything outside of how strong your work is. But you can learn from just applying, because every time you apply, you have to articulate your vision. You have to do that. And then you learn each time you do that. And then you also discover when you, say for instance, I've been rejected from grants where there might be a comment, well, you've never done that before. Or we don't see a proof that you can actually do that. And so that's also something to think about, because then if you did, it gives you an opportunity to experiment with those forms, apply again, and which I did in another case, and be able to get that grant. So there's a you know, rejection. It's kind of hard for an artist, you know, no matter where you are in your career, but they can also be really important to your overall development for your vision. And I don't know how many, if this is, I know there are some composers here, you know, and I would say that there are a lot of people who you might not know, but that do private commissions if they are excited about your work, and if you can articulate how it can relate to something that they're interested in, you'll be surprised how many individuals will be open to commissioning you. I learned this from my friends who are painters. I had friends that, oh yeah, I have this couple that's commissioned me to do a painting. I'm like, wow, you know, you can do that with music. If you can really articulate the purpose of that music and how it may be able to enrich their lives. So it's something to think about. I mean, a lot of times people go, well, that went out in 1900 with Tchaikovsky and those composers. But no, you know, if you can really, you know, have that sense of understanding and be able to describe your way, that can really excite someone, and how it can be something of use and purpose in their life, you'll discover there's a lot of opportunities for that. Private commissioners and things like that. And I guess lastly is corporate. You know, now for about 6 years I had a record label with a collaboration of other people, Noir Records, and our purpose was to help artists like ourselves, independent artists who were doing classical, jazz, world music, spoken word. Our only goal was to help, you know, make the record. We didn't even consider income or profit, but it was like, how can we help people who have creative ideas but don't get the typical support from a major label, or how can we kind of put all our support together to help each one put a record out. That's kind of how we started off. And it was in the middle of .com, so there was a lot of opportunities to work with corporate entities. So we found ways to work with like Dockers to create a spoken word CD that they were interested in trying to understand more about the social scene in San Francisco. So we found relationships where we were able to kind of like talking to an individual, where we found a way that we can both mutually work together in that regard. So But I always got to go back to the purpose. I got that purpose early on of why you do what you do and how it reaffirms every day what you do. I mean, I got there early on through my grandfather in a spiritual sense. I don't mean religious, but respect for human dignity and whatever that is, and social justice. And then a lot of those doors open up because you're committed to that path. You meet people who have like mind. You meet people who want to help you fund the creation of a work that's going to be able to educate kids about the history of Harriet Tubman or the civil rights movement or whatever your interest may be.
Wow, amazing experiences and paths. Each of you has been involved in collaboration in different ways with other musicians or artists from other genres and with different kinds of community organizations. Would you be able to explain how those come about, whether these are ideas that come from you, your artistic interest, or people come and approach you with some interest or need that they have and want your collaboration with them? So how it works, how things get catalyzed, how maybe pros and cons of different kinds of collaborations, and where the sources of support come from.
I'll just quickly say, one of the reasons why I moved up here is because I saw Robert Henry Johnson perform like in 1995, and then I saw the Brown Fellinis play somewhere, and I was like, man, this type of energy is going on up here, and it wasn't supported by the film industry or the major. It was supported by the community. People were coming out. They weren't, doing a showcase. There was I saw something kind of really connective, and so I just started showing up to their gigs and their performances. I was like hounding Robert Henry Johnson. I'm like, I want to work with you, man. I want to work with you, and it took a while. But I didn't even work with him. I moved up here and we actually never worked for a while. But through him, I met other people. I met Reginald Savage, I read Robert Moses, and I started meeting other people in the community. But to answer that question is you got to kind of be where they are. You show up, and you go to, and you support. You actually go and attend concerts. There's someone you work with. You physically, kind of become involved in that process. That's kind of what got me up here.
No, I mean, that sounds like an amazing way to network and meet artists who can be of like-minded, particularly when you're getting to know an area. But for instance, with your projects about Harriet Tubman or Port Chicago, did those come from your desire to create those pieces, or did people come and approach you and say, can you do
Those actually came from a long-term vision of using jazz music, using the language of really slaves, bill cries, blues hollers, work songs, spirituals, and then finding compelling stories in history. And then there's a process, I spent a year at Stanford. Well, I knew I really wanted to research for this project, so I applied for a residency there. This last project, I applied for residency at University of Chicago for the same reason, for a different project. So those are just connected to a longer arc of a personal vision, but very open-minded on who I may work with and where it may take me.
That's great. I mean, with the Port Chicago, were there non-arts partners or community partners in that process, and how did you connect with them?
All of them have a mix of non-art. They have a mix of working with young kids. They have a mix with working in some sort of community. I mean, these are just things that I'm interested in. I don't think that every project or every artist needs to work this way, but this is what sort of compels me to get up at 6 o'clock when I have to in the morning, or stay up all night if I have to, because these things are interesting to me personally. Port Chicago, so if I want to know about the story of Port Chicago, I had to learn about the United States military, Navy, the history of that. I had to build collaborations with historians. I had to make communication with survivors of this blast. So these are things outside of the music. The music actually wasn't as difficult as understanding how to evoke the history with music.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to speak to process of collaboration and what kind of support? Because one of the things with collaboration is it enables an artistic vision, and in others it just broadens your base of support to do the work as well. So, any other?
I've sort of participated in many collaborations through the course of last almost 30 years. And some of them I'm the leader, and some of them I'm asked to participate in. But usually, a little bit unlike Marcus, for me the starting point usually is just the people. It's, is that person interesting to me? And that person could be a writer, that person could be a visual artist, it could be a dancer, it could be a director, and it could be a sound sculptor. It's just if that person does something that's compelling to me, I'll talk to them and say, I'd like to work with you. Let's see if there's any ideas that have some basis for something that we could make, that we could put on a stage, that we could make into a work for performance. And so now I have a pretty substantial sort of community of people that I like to work with regularly. So sometimes we come back to relationships. For instance, the choreographer Margaret Jenkins, I've been working with her since 1985, and we've made probably about 8 evening-length works over those years. And or an artist like Rindy Eckert, I probably made 12 pieces with Rindy. And then, but I also still am exploring new relationships, and I have new projects with different people. There's a mechanical sound artist named Matt Heckert, who's a very important collaborator in a recent project that was all to do with creating new sounds and creating invented musical instruments. So it's really the people. And then we sort of say we discovered the piece that we're going to make through a long, intensive collaborative process that requires you to be very open and vulnerable. You have to be willing to have your work not appreciated or be misunderstood, and you have to go out there and try to see what's this person that you've committed to going through a process with, a kind of arranged marriage for a period of time, to be really open to each other's artistry. And then sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes it blows up. Some collaborations fail. But I've done it enough that I think I can look for those danger signs and have some skills at negotiating around them, even if there's something like, this person is real sensitive about that, and they don't want to give up control of their work in the way that I need them to, but maybe over the 6 months of working together, they'll trust me, that they will go that step beyond where they're comfortable giving up control. Because basically collaboration means giving up control. Even if you're the boss, you give up control. But particularly in the most interesting collaborations are where you're co-equals. And there you have to give up control. But like I think I said earlier, it shows you something about your work, how some other person that you ostensibly respect because you invited them into collaboration or you agreed to join it, is how they're going to see your work. It's going to teach you something really important.
Yeah, since we're talking about hybrid business models, I would give an example on the combination of the artistic and business side. So some years ago, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts had a program called Under the Radar, and they selected a number of us to be guest curators for a performing arts series. And so I was one of the people who was a guest curator, and I curated this artist named Tohee Lee, a young Korean immigrant artist. And so I'd been working with her actually ever since I was a director at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center, when she had just practically come into the country in about 2000. And so later on she said, okay, I'd like to do something more with my work, and I'd like to work with you. And I said, well, why don't we go back to Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and see whether there's something else we can do. And so from there, I mean, it's not that easy, but you have your meetings, and then there's an agreement to commission a work. There was an agreement on Yerba Buena Center side to commission the work. Asian Improv would be the producer, because part of the reason why we were able to work together was because we had already had a positive experience as me being a guest curator from Asian Improv. So, so there on that side, so there was a Yerba Buena presented to the work. They commissioned the work. So coming from their side was a commissioning fee and a performance fee. From the Asian Improv side, we took the fact that we were collaborating with YBCA to write to the NEA, and we wrote a grant to the NEA, and we wrote to the music part, and then the music guy, who kind of likes us, he calls me back and says, well, I think this would fit better in the interdisciplinary side. So we said, oh, that's great advice, and so that'd be great. So then it was put into the interdisciplinary panel, and then actually then we got a $20,000 grant for the project. And so in addition to those, so we were able to, on the Asian Improv side, actually we're the smaller organization, but we were able to actually secure grants because of our reputation for innovative work. The other side of the collaboration was that I'm an older, well, not that old, but an older mentor composer for Tohi, and then helping her bring in the artists that she needed to do and work with the artist, like managing actually a first time relatively large budget work for her. Because, so I think that's part of what was really exciting about this project, was that as Asian Improv, we were able to facilitate Dohi, a very talented and really determined person, to have a large scale work. And it also was an important lesson for me because, see, I'm a horn player. And so at some point, people get tired of hearing the horn player. And so if we have to make the adjustment to do different things, that's what, see, we're always jealous of the bass players because they can play for everybody, and if they have the personality and the time, right, you can work for everybody. Nah. But anyway, well, it's always greener on the other side, right? But anyway, we took the lessons, it's trying to have not necessarily, it's always my name on it, or something like that. And that's been somewhat of the approach as a composer, somewhat also looking at myself as kind of like a designer, or some different way to look at it in terms, or facilitator. And that, to me, in the recent history, to me that was nice, that it was a large-scale work, it was an emerging artist, we got national funding, we had a world-class, institution presenting the work, and, an Asian Improv, and our artists were able to really have a really unusual opportunity to do something really great.
So we've got less than 5 minutes left, but we wanted to take some questions from the audience. So raise your hand and I'll try to grab the mic for you, or grab a mic if you're closer up front.
Yes, I just wanted to ask the panelists if they would comment on their teaching activities. It seems like you've described a variety of professional involvements, nonprofits, releasing your own material, performance, but I haven't heard you talk about you seem like you have something to give back, so I was just wondering if all of you do or not. Thank you.
That's a good question, and one that's very important to me, and I think it's probably important to a lot of artists, is the giving back part. But teaching, I started off teaching because I felt like it was a good way for me to actually learn more, and so, it started off just working with kids. So I had to really learn how to articulate this music to a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and then, that was a long time ago, and then it began about teaching things that I was interested in music, whether it was composition, whether it was a history, a musical component. So as it is today, I teach at an elementary school, Rooftop Elementary, where I bring in a curriculum that I've designed around the history of Harriet Tubman and jazz, or the history of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in jazz, or the history of, this year we did Louis Armstrong and jazz, but it had to do with his life in New Orleans and American history from that point up to today, and how Louis Armstrong influenced that history. But so that's for young people, and in every case I got to go out and learn that history. Some of it may be multi-year, some of it may be, like for Louis Armstrong, was really, I knew a lot about him, but I didn't know a lot of the details about him. So it took me, you know, a summer to really kind of beef up on that. And then, you know, and then you can, I also teach at Stanford, where I'll teach composition through the jazz workshop, or I was also on the Committee on Black Performing Arts. And for me, it just helped, having to do that, having to be prepared for that only helps the work that I do personally. So it's very important. The giving back, when I see young people responding to that music, young people, when I play Louis Armstrong and I see them get up and dance, then I know the power that music has and how it can be used more effectively to help young people learn math, science, politics, health. Harriet Tubman was someone who came with all these homeopathic remedies to help all the Northern soldiers during the Civil War. So you can really talk about health care, using her as a symbol, and then really exciting young people outside of just the music and getting them to like swing. Just get them to like respecting other people through the music.
I think we have time for one more question.
If you were able to make a recommendation for like a foundational grant or foundational collaboration experience, what would you suggest? Like, you know, I've done collaboration through other artist groups that I've worked with, but if I wanted to go out there and do my very first one, and so I have a little bit of a track record of having done collaborations, what do you think would be the best one to choose? Like for a first level? No, like if you say the San Francisco Foundation gives grants, or the National Endowment for the Arts gives grants, what would you say would be like a very primary first step for an artist who's trying to do their very first collaborative project and seek funding for it?
Who are you collaborating with? What are your common goals? What is it going to take to execute this project? Which foundations would be good, no matter if they're, you know, big or small? And then that's a first starting place. And then there's a lot of places you can go right here in Oakland or San Francisco. The East Bay Community Foundation is one. San Francisco Foundation you mentioned. There are the Creative Work Fund is another one, you know. And the thing is, maybe they seem a little intimidating at first, but until you apply for one and get rejected, if that's the case, you learn from that process. But I think you have to kind of start off, what is the vision? You got to do all of that work first. And that might tell you, well, this grant right here will work perfect for that, because part of that grant is I got to go and do 3 performances in my community, or I have to do this. So you also want the money that you're getting to be aligned with your goals and perhaps your belief system. You know, I mean, at least for me, I do. And so that determines where you go to.
I'll give a little different perspective. I always felt, and maybe someone told me this early on, that nobody pays you to do it the first time. You basically, you get paid. Foundations usually support you for work you already have, for work you can demonstrate that you've already done or are able to do. I would start by asking to find the people that you want to work with. And it's possible that the synergy of that group of people will make sense both for the people inside the group and also to a foundation, like maybe East Bay Community Foundation or maybe San Francisco Foundation, although they're not going to be funding the arts for much longer. That's not true? Okay, well, I've been misinformed then. Maybe they're changing priorities or the way they're funding it. But in any case, I think you have to, I never got a commission to write music until I was writing pieces that people wanted to play. And so I think if collaboration is the direction you want to go, find people that you want to work with. Find an artist that's compelling to you. It might be a director, a theater director, or a playwright, or a choreographer, or a dancer. Just and start to work. And I think if you can demonstrate that you have that ability, then there's going to, and that you've got a relationship that's a true relationship, then I think the funding is going to come. And I think the places that Marcus mentioned are all good places, but I don't think it's realistic to say go to Creative Work Fund until you have until you have a little bit of a track record of doing the kind of thing that you're going to propose to do?
Well, I would say that in consulting, we have this term called grant readiness, which means having your work sample together, having the plan that the panel can say, oh, that's ready to go, meaning that they're convinced that it will happen, because that's one of the biggest things that people have a problem with, is the risk factors in whether, in giving a grant, whether the project will actually happen and happen in the level, the way that you speak about it. And so that's where documentation becomes really, really important. And I think some of the things that was brought up earlier in the previous session about getting your music out there and getting your documentation, whether it's on YouTube or whatever, these things actually influence your what we call your positioning, you know, meaning your eligibility to get the grant. Because sometimes I look at going for grants kind of like going to buy a house, trying to get a loan, because you're trying to qualify. And so in order to qualify, you have to have a series of checklists of evidence that you can do it. And oftentimes, that's the thing about what they were talking about, or you can never predict who is going to see your work if it's positioned well on the web. And you talking, you know, it could be a little clip, 2 minutes, talking about what you do and who you want to do it with and all that, and showing how you're doing it. That could really influence when you come to panel time and someone says, well, yeah, I saw this on YouTube, and, you know, so the grant readiness part is really critical, and being properly prepared is very critical.
So I think our time has finished, and I really want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their expertise and their experience. I encourage you to go to their websites, because then you can read more about their collaborations and their history and even their sources of support on some of their pages. And I just really acknowledge how important, you know, hearing from each of you to identify that niche and that purpose. And that's really the solid foundation of your work, and then developing the strategic partnerships. And so I would add to the question about, you know, an early grant to go to, that Zellerbach Family Fund is actually a very friendly first stop. But in addition to looking at the funding sources, what I also hear from each of you is that you've developed some really important strategic partnerships in the community and with certain artists, and that also is part of that grant readiness, so that you have a home base that you know you can perform whatever the piece is, whether it's an intersection for the arts or Yerba Buena, or, you know, wherever the case may be. So anyway, thank you very much to all of you, and thank you.